to have Dick with us here today. And Dick, you are very practiced in the use of Zoom, but you and I have quite a long history. And it's kind of a short history, but it's quite deep. And I'm really looking forward to our time with you. And so I'm going to basically allow you to give your bio in a sense, as one of my early questions says. But before we begin, I'd like to have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you now for this opportunity to visit with Dick and to review some of the history and the implications of some of what we have learned in our times together, both near and far. Lord, I thank you for the way you lead and the way you strengthen and the way you instruct. And Lord, that's our desire during these Zoom times as well, Lord, that it isn't just a matter of information sharing, but it's also a matter of us understanding the time so we know how to pray and how to grow spiritually and to grow strong, recognizing that these times are different than any we've ever faced before in our land. So Lord, help us to draw close to you and to be strengthened in our service in these days. Now bless us in this time, Lord. May this be edifying and strengthening and bring glory and honor to your name. For we ask in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen. Well, thank you once again, Dick. And I'd like to, first of all, just as my first question says, I would like to have you give some background. I've got a large number of questions here, folks, and I don't know how many we're going to be able to get through, but there's a lot of territory. There's a lot of things that I would really like you to know about Michigan. And I think that Dick is, having come from the eastern side of the state, together, I think we can pull out a lot of important information that has implications that probably a lot of you have no awareness of at this point. But Dick, first of all, I want you to give a little bit of sense of your background, starting from your early years in Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you, Bill. I got to say it's a joy to be with you again. I just want to say, the last 2 or 3 years, in addition to what we're talking about here politically, and has also been a spiritual path for me, basically. And I appreciate the part of it that you are a part of and your interaction with me and Pastor McKay and other people. So we'll talk about that. And again, I want to thank you for the work you guys do all the time. You've been doing it for years, but including your hospitality for me. And so anyway, I was born in 1943 in Washington, D.C. I was fortunate enough to go to a high school in downtown Washington, D.C., and then to work for a number of government agencies, including the Federal Reserve System. I was in the IT department, so I really didn't understand all of the implications about the Federal Reserve and things that I've learned since. But I did work for private industry for half of my working life. That brought me to 9 states, and it gave me an appreciation for the United States of America, where the states are very different. So we lived in Texas, which was an eye-opener. If you grow up on the East Coast or the West Coast of America, you have a totally different viewpoint than if you all of a sudden live in Texas. 12 years in Texas and then 12 years in Michigan. So Michigan, yet again, was different than the others. And so that was helpful for me to kind of understand things. And so that's really how I ended up for 12 years. We did move out of Michigan last year, and we now live in Florida and visit with family in Maryland as well. So that's a quick summary.
That's a very quick summary, and it only basically touches the many deep involvements that you've been in a wide variety of areas, and I hope to be able to touch on a few of those, especially the work that you're in now. And we'll do that a bit later, or even presently, or shortly anyway. Dick, I want to have you talk to us about how you got involved, and this is where I first became aware of you, in the Southeast Michigan Tea Party. How many years, were you the founder of that? Anyway, give us a little history of that and how you got connected.
Right. Well, thank you for that. No, actually, I was, there have been 2 or 3, iterations of leadership for that group. Frankly, I went to a meeting. So we moved to Southeast Michigan, and I went to a meeting. The meeting actually was in town next to me, was in Troy, Michigan. It was in an Italian restaurant. It was a Tea Party meeting. Didn't know anything about it. I thought maybe we'd get a good Italian meal. And that night they showed the movie Agenda.
Wow.
My life has never been the same.
Unbelievable.
Movie Agenda, for those of you that may or may not be. By the way, it's available. It's online. You could probably watch it online tonight if you haven't. It's Curtis Bowers is the creator of that film, and one of the major voices on that film is a New Zealand accent, and that would be Trevor Loudon. So following that night, I got involved as a member of the Tea Party, eventually was on the board. But I was so struck by the message of communist infiltration, which is about what that movie's about and how deep it is. And I'm sure some of you know that Trevor Loudon is from New Zealand. He came to America specifically to work on saving America from communist takeover, which happened in New Zealand. So he's been in America ever since. I'm not really sure when he came here, but he lives here now. He happens to live in Florida. He's produced other movies. By the way, I'll jump back and forth because, Bill, I heard Trevor Loudon within the last week. In fact, yesterday, Tuesday, Trevor Loudon was on a radio program, an internet radio program with E.W. Jackson, who's a pastor. And the conversation was, who does Trevor Loudon think will be the presidential vice president for the Democrats? I'll come back to that in a minute. Well, we invited Trevor Loudon to come to Michigan. And what a gift. I got to drive Trevor Loudon around to 14 locations over a week or two period. And that was my first exposure to the west side of the state, Traverse City, etc. We actually organized all those venues for Trevor, and I got to hear Trevor Loudon give this speech that he gives so well about the infiltrate. So Trevor Loudon has a website called trevorloudon.com. He also has a key, it's called KeyWiki, which is his deep encyclopedia library of every communist you can ever name. So you could give him a name. You could tell him somebody's on the Detroit City Council. He's got an entry in KeyWiki about that person. Trevor Loudon significantly was the person who discovered that Obama's mentor as a teenager was Frank Marshall Davis. And then Frank Marshall Davis had moved to Hawaii from Chicago. He was a self-avowed Marxist, communist, member of the Chicago Communist Group. He moved out to Hawaii, and Barack's mother and grandparents provided Barack the opportunity to be fully mentored as a 15 to 18-year-old by Frank Marshall Davis. So clearly, Barack's mother was very, very much of a progressive communist, and for the grandfather, who was also an organized communist, to provide that background for Barack was significant. Trevor Loudon made that research finding before the elections, but didn't really bother anybody that much. And so Barack was, of course, elected twice. But that's Trevor Loudon's background. His most recent book is called White House Reds, and it's an explanation of all of the candidates for the Democratic Party in 2020 and their communist background. So if you want to know about Kamala Harris or Cory Booker or the other people that are prominent within the Democratic Party that have communist backgrounds, that's it. His book is about the 100 members of the House of Representatives who are members of the Democratic Socialists of America, and 20 senators. So he's very, very specific, chapter and verse, and that's the kind of guy he is. So that changed my life, getting to know Trevor and getting to know Michigan and the reactions that we had. That was probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, things moved really quickly for you. You know, your name all of a sudden emerged for me, you know, here's Southeast Tea Party, they're doing this. And we often would have similar speakers that you would have. And Trevor was certainly one of those as well. Then along the way, though, another thing that you emerged into, and really was, and we had you actually speak at our location in Grand Rapids and here, was very eye-opening to, I think, many people. But that has to do with the Sharia Crime Stoppers, and I would like to have us spend some time with that. What is Sharia Crime Stoppers, and what was it that triggered that? That created within you a desire to do something about it?
Well, it's probably easiest to tell it chronologically. So, you know, as a Tea Party member, we got exposed to different groups. And one of the topics that we got exposed to was, well, actually, Trevor got us connected to a group that was doing research on places in the Middle East, like Qatar and the other Middle East countries. So that was kind of interesting. That was just a door open, and you learn all about the Middle East. Then all of a sudden we realized that one of the people they introduced us to was Ann Corcoran. Ann Corcoran, for 10 or 12 years now, had a website called Refugee Resettlement Watch, which is a conversation about what most people don't know, now they do, but then they didn't know. So let's say 6 years ago, the legal immigration, it's called Refugee Resettlement, 1980 law passed by, or supported by Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy under Jimmy Carter, opened the floodgates for legal refugee resettlement. Well, we started studying that. We were invited, Gary Kubiak and I, who was the president of the Tea Party at the time, were invited to 60 presentations that we made. And all we did was travel around the state. We got statistics out of the US State Department about the incredible numbers of people who were coming to America, particularly to Michigan, county by county, city by city, legally, primarily from the Middle East. And so we put those presentations on around the state and got quite a bit of reaction. One of the things that we learned was that the law says, cut me off of any of the details too much, but the law says that every place that's going to get refugees has to be notified in advance. Well, we did a little research and found out that the state of Michigan under Republican Governor Snyder was all for immigration. His Department of Health and Human Services aggressively worked with all the 9 vendors that were paid money to bring refugees into America. In Michigan, that was primarily the Catholic Church, the Catholic bishops, the Catholic Charities, and the Lutheran Immigration Services, which has been renamed to Samaritas. These 2 groups brought in thousands of refugees over a period of years into the state. They were obligated, according to the law, to meet with county and city officials and tell them, hey, we're going to bring in a bunch of 50 immigrants into your territory, and we're doing it legally, and we're going to get them started. We're going to get them connected to the welfare system in your state. And after we bring them in, it's your responsibility in the state of Michigan to pay for their services. They'll be hooked up to state benefits and federal benefits, and that's just the way it works. And then we'll move on and come back and tell you later. Well, it turns out I live in Oakland County, and I filed Freedom of Information requests and found out that no one from Oakland County had been invited to any of the meetings that the state of Michigan under Snyder held 4 times a year to talk about refugee flow. So we visited with the county executive, who at the time was a well-known person named Brooks Patterson. And we had a meeting with Brooks Patterson. Jim Simpson and I were there in his office. And he invited Snyder's direct report, Nick Lyons, to come in and talk about what's going on and why has no one from the county of Oakland been invited to these meetings to understand people are coming, to prepare, to evaluate whether or not we can actually absorb them. Well, it turned out that his county had taken 11,000 refugees over 8 years and never was invited to a single meeting. So I just give you that background as an example of the flow. So we then started figuring out that the refugees come in by by country. We determined that in one given year, we started watching the national numbers. So Michigan was getting 12% of the refugees from Syria in any given year. We presented that information around the state and found out nobody knew that. By the way, the same government statistics said that 98% of those coming from Syria were Muslim, self-identified as Muslim, either Sunni, Shia, whatever. That's all in the database, but nobody knows it ahead of time, not in Oakland County anyway. Well, that would kind of cause a stir. And then the other side of the coin is that even though they're brought in by the Catholic Church and the Lutheran churches, the law prohibits them from ever discussing anything of a religious nature with these Muslim people coming into the state. Well, at that point, we started learning about Islam. I didn't know anything about Islam 6 years ago.
What year would that have been, Dick? You said 6 years ago?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So I knew nothing about Islam, I will say that. I did go to college. I did go to graduate school. I was raised, I happened to go to Catholic high school, Catholic college. I had 8 years of theology taught by Jesuit teachers, and I knew nothing about Islam. Okay, so we started learning about Islam since the people coming to Michigan are largely from the Middle East, and 98% of them in a given year from one country. By the way, at that time, the country of Syria was complete uproar. There was the federal government will tell you they have a 15-point vetting program, the best vetting program in the world. However, there is no data. The process is neat. But in Syria, there was no record of these people because they were at war. So there was no records of any information about these people coming into America, whether they were criminals, whether they were jihadists, whether they were, there was no data, so they could not be vetted. We had that argument back and forth. Federal government absolutely would just tell you we got the best vetting system, but he would say, well, there's no data, and they would agree there's no data, but they took on their word. If they said they had never been involved with terror, no big deal. The federal government accepted it, and the state of Michigan accepted it, and the Catholic Church and the Lutheran services accepted it. Well, that was a little troublesome since, as we learned, and as I think your people probably know, every Muslim in the world is supposed to know Sharia. That's the law of how they live their life in great detail. And basically, a tenet of that is if you're you're engaged with people who are not Muslim, you are advised and sanctioned to lie to them if it promotes Muslim. We also learned from Ann Corcoran that hijra is the Islamic law method of spreading Islam. You are rewarded in heaven if you put suicide bombing equipment on your body and blow people up, but you also can get to heaven if you simply pick up and move from one country to another in order to move Sharia and Islam around the world. So all these people coming to Michigan who were Sharia compliant understood that. Well, we didn't understand that, and then we learned about it. So the incremental number of people coming from a different mindset that included criminality towards women and children got our attention. By the way, I'll just say that when we switched from refugee resettlement, Gary Kubiak and I tried to go to the 60 locations where we had been talking about refugee resettlement and talk about Sharia. We were not invited, other than to Bill Johnson's house, where we did get to talk about it. So we were limited in terms of people wanting to deal with the fact that we were being infiltrated by the same ideology that was killing American soldiers in the Middle East. Those people were coming in droves. The other thing we learned was historically, and again, I think you people probably know that, we're talking about 50 years of immigration from the Middle East into Michigan. We're talking about Henry Ford, so longer than that, but we're talking about a medical community in Michigan, which is largely, has lots and lots of Middle Eastern Sharia compliant doctors. They're on the boards. Our friend, the governor, had appointed multiple Sharia compliant medical doctors to medical boards. They were they were part of the economic fabric of the state, and therefore they were given access. So we also went to Lansing, and we found in Lansing that nobody wanted to talk about Sharia. In fact, Gary Kubiak and I were invited to a Senate hearing with Patrick Colbeck on January 26th in 2016. Patrick Colbeck, who eventually ran for the Republican candidacy for governor and was devastated by the Republican Party because he ran and asked questions about Sharia. But our first encounter with Patrick Colbeck, we were invited to sit in a Senate hearing, first time in Lansing, and Patrick invited me to get up in front of this hearing and present just the numbers of people coming into the state. That simple. 6 slides, get up, sit down, no editorial comment. At that moment, Patrick Colbeck and Gary Kubiak and I were accosted verbally by a senator and called racist. All we did was give a number of people from a country. That's it. The newspaper had been invited by the Democratic members of the board of the hearing, and we got a headline about Patrick Colbeck and the people he brought with him were racist because we talked about refugee settlement. And by the way, sitting next to me in that hearing was a guy I got to know really well. His name is Dawood Walid. Dawood Walid, at that time, and still is the executive director for CARE Michigan. He had 15 different groups, Catholic and Lutheran, speak against Patrick Colbeck's resolution. It was a simple resolution to say to Governor Snyder, thank you for being concerned, because Snyder had indicated a concern about the number of refugees coming in from an unvetted country, namely Syria. And all we did, the resolution was to acknowledge that and thank the governor for doing that. Well, we were, anyway, the interesting point was the head of that committee was a Republican. He did nothing to sanction the Democratic senator who accosted Patrick Colbeck as a racist. So that's the beginning of the story, the understanding that a large part of this problem in Michigan, you would expect the Democratic Party to align themselves with Islam. You would expect them to align themselves with Marxism. You're seeing that right now. I didn't know any better. I thought the Republicans were the opposition. It turns out in Michigan, the Republicans are quite progressive compared to Texas and other states. And they're all set. Snyder wanted every immigrant he could get to come to Michigan. We had a couple of good senators like Colbeck and representatives like Rumstead, but in general, we actually brought legislation from another state to put in front of the House. Mr. Runstad was our sponsor, and that went nowhere. So we quickly learned that, and that's what happened when Colbeck ran for governor. He actually asked Abdul El-Sayed, the Sharia-compliant Democratic candidate, on a debate to identify the fact that to talk about Sharia. Well, Abdul lost his cool at that meeting in front of the 150 members of the Michigan press and said, "Mr. Colbeck, you may not hate Muslims, but all Muslims hate you." And so he refused to discuss the fact that Abdul is a Sharia-compliant, no question about it, adult man, happens to have a degree in medicine. As far as we know, he never actually had a physical patient, but he was appointed to the head of the Detroit, Michigan health director, and he's running for governor. And he got 340,000 votes and almost became the governor of Michigan because the person that defeated him, Gretchen Whitmer, is. So he got 340,000 votes in the state. Many non-Muslims voted for Abdul El-Sayed. He ran on a very progressive ticket. He refused to talk about Sharia, but we know he's Sharia compliant because he acknowledged that his head touched the ground 34 times a day. He acknowledged that he was the president of the Muslim Student Association at the University of Michigan, which is a Muslim Brotherhood front group. His wife was an officer in the Michigan University Muslim Student Association. Her father, at the time, a medical doctor in Macomb County, was on the board of CARE. So CARE Michigan Muslim Brotherhood is the gentleman on that, Dr. Taib, I believe, is currently a board member of CARE, Council of Islamic American Relations, which is a Muslim front group, who was an unindicted co-conspirator of the Holy Land trial, etc. All we did was talk about that, and we had people like Leo Holman and other people who ended up becoming great friends of ours talk about it. And so Abdul El-Sayed, we went out of our way to bring people to understand who he was. We were very fortunate. This is really how the story developed, Bill. We got Tom Trento, who I didn't even really hardly know, and his team to come to Michigan. He brought a person named Laura Loomer. There were confrontations inside meetings celebrating Abdul El-Sayed, and we caught those on video, which is what Tom Trento was a genius at. Laura Loomer, who's running for Congress in Florida, approached Abdul El-Sayed and asked him specific questions about how he could be a Sharia-compliant man, understanding that women are treated poorly terribly, property in Sharia. How could he be the governor of all the people of Michigan? Well, at that point, people closed ranks around him, wouldn't let him, he didn't answer the question, but we got it all on video. So basically, I'll give credit to Tom Trento and his team. And you were part of that, Bill. Actually, I believe you were part of that activity with Tom Trento. You were interviewed, I think, one of the interviews we did in Bloomfield, you were there. So I'm jumping around a little bit, except to say that one thing led to another, and Abdul El-Sayed got tremendous support in Michigan, really, well past any set of registered Muslim voters, and is now, just to jump forward, he is the advisor to candidate Joe Biden on health. He's on a formal committee advising Joe Biden on his health policies. If Joe Biden was to be elected, I'm sure he would be on a transition team, and he frankly might actually become the health czar under Obama. So this is kind of sort of the connection. I'll take a breath and let you tell me where you want to go.
That's great stuff, Dick. And I learned an awful lot there. I knew this was going to be. I thought if this wasn't significant to others, I knew it would be to me, and I'm sure it is to others as well. This history is absolutely fantastic and very important. Yeah. All this is important background for sure. Now, another aspect of this, which was also spiritual warfare, which I'm sure has brought great discouragement to you, has been the need for the Sharia Crime Stoppers. And I'd like you to be able to speak about how that evolved and why and what, and some of the roadblocks that you faced.
Well, thank you. I think that I'll try to remember here. So we had the Tea Party that we formed a group called Secure Michigan, which was kind of an intermediate group. By the way, I want to give credit to the Southeast Michigan Tea Party. Any funding that I've ever had to make copies to bring to you or anybody else has come out from that Tea Party group. So this is a Tea Party that was very, very positive in action in addition to education. Pure Michigan was kind of an intermediate group where we put lots of information about the topics I just addressed. What we became concerned about was we already had reached critical mass. We already had if no more refugees ever came into, so we were trying to get the refugee flow to stop. Well, if we were done, if there was never another refugee from the Middle East, we already had achieved critical mass in Michigan. We learned about all the mosques in Michigan. People like Ann Corcoran, who have been writing for 10 years about Muslim, refugee resettlement, she came to Michigan. We took her to Hamtramck. We took her to Dearborn. Well, first of all, I had never been to those cities. I was blown away. And here's an expert who's been following the subject. She couldn't believe what she saw in Dearborn and what she saw in Hamtramck. We brought.
And what did she see? How would you describe that?
She would see, in particular, Hamtramck was striking. Hamtramck is striking because you can take a ride in Hamtramck and you will see on every single street a woman covered head to toe in black with her eyes showing in America, typically pushing a baby carriage. You will see streets that are named after Bangladesh Avenue, etc. You will see flags from the Middle East flying. You will see a flagpole sequence with the American flag and then 10 flags from places in the Middle East. You will see, of course, Hamtramck. So Hamtramck is interesting. Oh, by the way, one of the people that popped into our lives, in addition to, we'll fill that in maybe, would be Phil Haney. So I've driven Phil Haney into Hamtramck. We've driven the gentleman who, let me step back for a second. Two people have written books about Michigan that people should see. One of them is Leo Hohmann. The book is called Stealth Invasion. This is the story about refugee resettlement, etc. Leo Hohmann has learned a lot about Michigan. Raheem Kassam, who used to be a Breitbart, he was a Breitbart editor he traveled to Michigan with Steve Bannon. We were together with Steve Bannon. He wrote a book called No-Go Zones, where he wrote about the no-go zones in London and in Belgium, but he had a whole paragraph about the no-go zones in Michigan. Oh my God. So here's an international, by the way, he had been a Muslim. He was a British citizen when he came to visit us. He included a whole chapter in his book, which is still available on Amazon, about Michigan. He wrote about Hamtramck. So I guess what I'm coming to the point was we became we didn't really want to hear that we were an issue for the world to know about. Raheem lives in London. London has a Muslim mayor. Raheem could write about all the increase in crime, the no-go zones in London. Now he's acknowledging that Michigan has no-go zones. We didn't really want to hear that. We wanted them to talk us out of it. So I guess what I'm going at, we realized that Michigan had a strategic problem. If you infiltrate enough, so we started learning about the mosques. We learned that the mosques are never, you can't get into a mosque. Mosques are never monitored, etc. So we began to realize that there was, what we read about with horror in London, there are places where the police won't go. Well, there's places in Michigan where law enforcement is absolutely not interested or involved. And so we got to understand how local governments cooperate with the growth of Islam. They have no problem with that, despite the fact. So Sharia Crime Stoppers, which was the question, Here's the answer to that question. I had to think for a minute. My wife knows that I read a lot, I talk a lot, I have a big mouth. She said to me one day, why don't you do something, act? She said, so she told me to get on a plane, spend my own money, and go down to the southern part of the country and sit in a class with David Boris. So David Boris is a co-founder, along with me and Mary Werbicki, of the Sharia Crime Stoppers. Who's David Boris? David Boris was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, in the military police, and then a civilian 16-year veteran of sheriff's departments in Georgia, and a 3-year police chief in a town in Georgia. So he knows what he's talking about. He was horrified by the purge under Obama in 2011 and 2012. The FBI declared they would no longer train anyone in their department. The DOG would not train anybody, and they would not train local law enforcement on anything having to do with Islam, Sharia, jihad. And so at the demand of the Muslim Brotherhood under Obama in 2011 and 2012, all the training of FBI agents, military personnel, local law enforcement that would have been done discussing Islam, Sharia. Remember, Sharia is a code of law. Sharia is like a constitution. Sharia tells people how to behave, how to treat women, how to treat infidels, the inability to leave Islam, child marriage, pedophilia, honor killing. It's all sanctioned by Sharia. Well, I sat in a 2-day class with 60 policemen in Alabama, taught by David Boris. I watched these policemen who knew nothing, sheriff's department police people, about Sharia, become not just educated, but angry. How could they do their job if they were not trained? How could they interact with the FBI when the FBI refused to train them? By the way, the people that were in jeopardy, David Boris explained to them that they have been targeted by ISIS. ISIS published the names of law enforcement in America, their addresses, and encouraged any jihadis in America to personally go after police. So this was the beginning of the attack on police. And I sat in the class and I just couldn't believe what I heard and what I saw. So afterwards, I got together with David and said, David, we got to get you. David, by that time, was doing word of mouth. He would get one sheriff to bring him in and he would tell another sheriff, but only in the South. I will share with you that we have got David's material registered in the state of Maryland, state of Michigan. We went through the effort of getting onto the state of Michigan police database for training, and we got the class registered. We had to fill out paperwork. I did it personally. We outlined the class. We told people exactly what the class was about. We had to answer all these questions about getting credit, etc. It's now registered, has been for 4 or 5 years. You can go to it's called, this slips my mind. It's got an official name. It is the database where you go to get police training if you're in Oakland County or Western Michigan, and you can get state dollars to pay for the class. Well, guess what? The class is free. The only class requirement is travel expenses for the instructor, which would be David Boris. So any jurisdiction in Michigan has had access to that information, could have invited David over the last 5 years to come in and give 2 days of free training. The only expense would have been two nights in a hotel for David Boris. That's the class that I sat in. So my goal was to promote training in Sharia. And the reason was we did presentations, including in your office and in other places, including a Bloomfield church and at tea parties. We talked about the fact that it is sanctioned for men to marry children. That's a crime in Michigan. That's a Sharia sanctioned crime. It is sanctioned for a young man in Farmington Hills to kill his mother as an honor killing. It's sanctioned, and it actually happened. We couldn't believe it. Rape of non-Muslim women is sanctioned under Sharia. We would tell the story about, women walking around a mall in Oakland County. If you see a woman covered and she's with a man, that man believes that the uncovered women are prey for sexual assault, It's what Muhammad said was okay, and it's what Sharia says is okay, so it's sanctioned. That means it's openly discussed in the mosques in West Michigan or Oakland County. Imams talk about what Muhammad did and teach how you're supposed to behave. That behavior would lead to crimes in America: rape, human trafficking, pedophilia, child marriage. That's totally unacceptable. And there's a police chief who's willing to train the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, but guess what? Nobody, not one jurisdiction has ever bit the bullet and asked or accepted the training. We've actually physically, we've been in their offices promoting the training, and they would say no. We then provided, that's how we got into Zoom, which is what we're doing now. We came up with the idea we could put David Boris on Zoom. We built a 16-week, 1 hour each week Zoom with David Boris presenting with his beautiful slides the presentation that I saw in Alabama, 16 hours live. We did it on Zoom. We made it available, we recorded it, and we used that to encourage departments to bring David in for live training with Q&A and everything. The answer is zero. Zero police departments in the state of Michigan have any interest in being trained. We were actually advised by the Bloomfield Hills Police to stop sending them information. And it was a typical progressive city response. We will continue to train our officers in diversity and all comparative religion. In other words, it would not bite the bullet to have an opening conversation that would lead them to ever getting the training. So this is a situation where progressive city councils hire police chiefs and make it pretty clear. By the way, I will share this goes all the way up to the governor of the state of under Snyder. Nobody wants the training. So that would be, Sharia Crime Stoppers was an opportunity to make the training available online, to promote people getting the training, and to teach little, even with us, doing a 1 hour webinar presentation in a church. Very few churches let us talk. Bloomfield Hills Baptist let us talk. American Decency, Bill Johnson let us talk, and I think we came out there and presented that to both in Fremont and Grand Rapids, right? Yes. So the conversation is, are there really Sharia crimes against women? Yes, they are. Well, what are they? Is that acceptable? How can the state of Michigan not want their police to be trained when people in the hundreds of mosques in Michigan are talking about pedophilia? It's okay. Raping non-Muslim women, it's okay.
Female genital mutilation.
Yeah, a big deal. Excellent. Great point. So FGM was an issue in Michigan. By the way, let's just talk about that for a second. It was a federal crime on the books for 30 years, never an indictment. Finally, there was a federal indictment in Michigan. Never went anywhere, got thrown out by the way, we have a court problem in Michigan and the Midwest in general. You've got Obama-appointed judges who are absolutely all over any of these topics. So the federal crime didn't go anywhere, but if you notice what happened, states like Michigan, the politicians got outrageous. So the politicians in Michigan, Republican and Democrat, created an FGM law in reaction to the federal indictment that was 3 times more penalties than the federal law. And I was sitting there when these politicians would ask for re-election because they did a great thing. They passed a very tough FGM law. But has there been a single indictment in Michigan for FGM? FGM is people come from out of state to Michigan to have FGM performed on their daughters. Michigan has a very, very extensive medical community of Sharia compliant doctors. The doctor that was indicted is part of a network of, I think they're called Dawoodi. It's an Indian sect of Islam. Their mosques are all connected. So mosques in other states know about the doctors in Michigan, and they bring their daughters to Michigan to get FGM done. So I guess my only point is, despite the fact that there are laws on the book, you do not have police trained to pursue that. Theoretically, you would be training teachers, school nurses, etc. in FGM? What are the signs? When do you identify, when you contact police, it's time to go do an investigation? The answer is the police are not prepared. The case in point in Farmington Hills was, we got a phone call from the police department. There were people in the police department who gave us the heads up that the honor killing in Bloomfield Hills was being prosecuted as an individual crime. 15-year-old boy was indicted for killing his mother. The rest of the story made it clear that the investigation should have included the father and the imam, and that multiple people, including family members, knew about the decision to kill the mother because she had dishonored the family. Well, of course, nobody wanted that training. And we tried to respond to that. And you have a situation where there's a specific case where multiple people were involved in murder in Farmington Hills. And there's a 15-year-old boy who's probably under indictment and may be in court today. Clearly, his father impacted him. Clearly, this is acceptable. Why? Because she was filing for an American divorce. The father had domestic violence cases brought against him relative to the family, got a restraining order. He was not supposed to talk to the son. He did repeatedly. They were supposed to have depositions for the divorce. The week before, all of a sudden, mom is dead, having fallen out of a window on the second floor. So we would bring people's attention to the notion that there is Sharia crime in America and nobody really cares, including the police departments. So,
And Dick, one of the things that just stood out as well and fits in so clearly with this is, so you had these efforts in Oakland County with your own sheriff,
Yep.
your own law enforcement department, and then we are in America, and I'm sure many that are listening to us, at least in earlier years, we had high regard for the FBI, and we believe that if we really have a serious problem, we can turn to the FBI. And so here is a major issue with the FBI and the Muslim Brotherhood. You got invited, and tell about that in your meeting at the FBI at the Bridge meeting.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, these questions are excellent, and I appreciate your putting together the program and the questions. So fast forward a little bit, let me digress and just say there's an article out this week by Leo Hohmann talking precisely about this problem. We have Obama people waking up every day, going into Washington, D.C., sitting down at their desk and getting paid by the federal government to do their job. They are civil servants who were put in place by Barack Obama at grades 9, 10, 12, 13, in mid-level and senior positions, and this is their job. They go to work. They are implementing the Obama-Biden agenda relative to the Muslim Brotherhood and other issues every day, and that's why Trump has been less than successful on all these topics. Yes, he's done a lot of good things, but in this space, he has basically been prohibited from seeing the truth, and it's still a mess. So after 9/11, again, the Republican president, George Bush, made a massive mistake, stood there with the president of CARE, Muslim Brotherhood, standing behind him. He got up and said, Islam is a religion of peace. Massive misunderstanding. Historically, the legacy of that is unbelievable. So since that time, within 2 weeks after 9/11, there were people in the administration under Bush and then later on under Obama who were concerned that Americans would hurt Muslims. I'm serious. And so the FBI began to have a quarterly meeting in Muslim communities in Michigan and other places to make sure the Muslim community was not in any way impacted by American citizens. And so these Bridges meetings were established on a quarterly basis and continued from 2001 right up to the present time. And they are quarterly meetings. They're held in communities either in Dearborn or in Oakland County, Macomb County. And what happens is the FBI has co-chairmen. In fact, current co-chairman of the Bridges meeting is the U.S. Attorney for the state of Michigan. He reports directly to the Department of Justice. U.S. attorneys are typically appointed or reappointed by the president or by the Attorney General. The current U.S. attorney is named Matthew Snyder. He was a Bill Schuette, Attorney General for Bill Schuette as the Attorney General and that staff. And he was appointed by Jeff Sessions. He hosts a meeting every quarter, and it turns out that those meetings are basically more concerned about what are called civil rights and civil liberties of the Muslim community than they are about law enforcement. And so those meetings have a particular agenda. I say we, a friend of mine and myself are familiar with the Chaldean community in Michigan. The Chaldean community, I think you probably know, are Christians who came to America from Iraq primarily, and they populate different communities, including Sterling Heights, Michigan, and West Bloomfield, etc. So they were invited to the Bridges meeting. They were a token non-Muslim group who was invited to sit in these meetings. And what the organization officially is called the Middle East Christian Congress. And it's an amalgamation of groups that are Christian, but are from the Middle East. So on paper, this group includes Armenians, Christian. Remember, the Armenians were massacred 100 years ago. They include churches from Armenian churches, Chaldean churches, etc. So anyway, one of them invited us to sit in that meeting. So we would attend meetings, and we would sit there, and we saw repeatedly the following kind of behavior. By the way, we reported some of this information, and you can go back and look at articles again by Leo Hohmann, Hohmann, and you'll see Leo Hohmann has written about the Bridges meetings as well. So when you're sitting in one of these meetings, you're sitting there with the head of CARE, the Muslim Brotherhood. Dawood Walid is in the meetings. That's the same gentleman I mentioned earlier. And you'll have people who have come up from Washington, D.C., from the Department of Homeland Security, Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Department, which is very concerned about sensitivity training for Muslims so they never feel offended. In these meetings, you will see the U.S. attorney, and the head of the FBI for Michigan absolutely positively pander to the Muslim community. They will sit there and be abused by the Muslim community, complaining about the watch list and why they have to go through the watch list when they go to the airport. They will allow direct criticism of the President of the United States by Debbie Dingell. Debbie Dingell is a congresswoman from Michigan. I was in a meeting where she represents the Dearborn area. She went out of her way to criticize the President of the United States because he was not allowing the Muslim community from the Middle East to continue to come into the country. So here you have the FBI, who reports to the Attorney General, who reports to the President of the United States, entertaining a very politically aggressive meeting where the Muslims are getting to see a U.S. congressman really criticize the President of the United States on policy as well as on a personal attack. No problem. We also attended a meeting where the FBI introduced a woman who works for the FBI. Her name was Bushra Aweli. There's a whole article about her. She wears a hijab to the meetings. She's an employee of the FBI. She made a presentation. 80 people from the Muslim Brotherhood and the Muslim community are there. There's a sprinkling of law enforcement from cities in Michigan sitting in the meeting. Her presentation was about how that jihad is a personal struggle. Jihad is not associated with terror, and somebody's overemphasizing the idea of terror, jihad in America. For her, jihad is her difficulty in eating too much cheesecake. And the head of the FBI, the head of the Justice Department in Michigan, laughed and applauded her. She also said that Allahu Akbar is not associated with terrorism or stabbings, despite the fact that we just had a stabbing at the Flint airport a month before that, where the man put a knife in the neck of a policeman at the airport and yelled Allahu Akbar. Her comment is Allahu Akbar is just a way of saying something that, congratulations, when somebody has a baby, we say Allahu Akbar. A complete set of propaganda coming out of the mouth of an FBI employee in a hijab. She's part of community relations for the FBI. This is clearly the FBI's position. In that same meeting, the FBI brought up, without being asked about it, to tell the Muslim community that the FBI in Michigan and the Justice Department was concerned that the #1 domestic threat for terrorism in the state of Michigan was white supremacists. So white supremacists is the biggest domestic terrorism program or issue, challenge that the FBI is on top of. They're concerned about white supremacists terrorizing the Michigan communities, including the Muslim who they're talking to. They're talking to the Muslim Brotherhood in the meeting. They're telling Dawood Walid that the FBI is afraid for him because of all the white supremacists in Michigan who might hurt them. We also sat in a meeting where the FBI presented a full presentation on active shooter training, active shooter training for mosques. So the FBI is training in the meeting people who are associated with mosques in America about how to deal with active shooter training. The premise being the active shooter, of course, would be a white supremacist. So this training tells them how to arm themselves. I believe this training probably identified the ability to get firearms, perhaps through federal grants, to make sure that the mosque is defended from people who might come in and actively shoot up the mosque. Well, connected to other things they said, the implication is those would be the threat, which would be the white supremacists. So we sat there, we saw that, we understood that. I just want to connect the dot. One of the people in that meeting is a famous imam. He's so famous because he's the imam of the House of Knowledge in Dearborn. He's famous because he speaks aggressively in support of the Iranian regime. He is a Shia imam. Iran, of course, is Shia. He has been critical of the administration and supportive of the Iranian government, and he's an imam. So he's talking to the Sharia community in Dearborn, and he's sitting in the training about how to support, how to protect his mosque from an active shooter. That's the message.
What's his name?
So when we fast forward to the story we're going to tell maybe about Filippini and the Bluefield Church, I would just say his name is Elahi, E-L-A-H-I. Imam Elahi is going to reappear a little bit later when we talk about he went out of his way to get a Bloomfield Hills church, an otherwise good church, a Bible teaching church, cancel with 1 day's notice a very important briefing where a person that we continue to work with who was speaking, his name is Pastor Sharam Hadian and Jim Simpson were scheduled to give a presentation in the Bloomfield Hills Baptist Church on September 11th, 2019. And the day before, the imam orchestrated a move against the elders of the church and got them to cancel. So
and that appeared that appeared in the Detroit Free Press, which raised community awareness of this meeting that was to be scheduled.
Right. So that's an important indicator of where Michigan is. Michigan is in such a place that an imam who is directly tied to the Iranian regime can basically orchestrate it. Can I prove what I'm going to say? I'm not sure, but I'll just give you the facts. You can draw the conclusions. So the pastor who was supportive of Sharam Hadian and Jim Simpson speaking at the church on September 11th. Now, who are these two people? Jim Simpson had been in the state of Michigan, if you remember, with me and Brooks Patterson. So he's known
with me. And he was going to be coming and speaking it up with us the next day.
Right. So his books, his literature, his writing, you touch on the red-green axis. The red-green axis is the Marxist, or the red. Green is Islam, and he is an extensive researcher and writer and presenter. The other person, Sharam Hadian, is a former Muslim born in Iran, the same Iran that Imam Elahi is supporting. But Sharam Hadian is born in Iran, was very familiar with the revolution that put the Ayatollah in place. It affected him and his family, came to America, became a Christian pastor, was also a policeman, and also ran for governor of state of Washington. This is a very special human being. He had spoken previously on the interfaith movement. By the way, Imam Elahi is the #1 interfaith movement operative in the state of Michigan, very, very tight with the Archbishop of Detroit, Vigneron. They have appeared together repeatedly, and they are promoting Chrislam. They're promoting the intersection of Christianity and Islam with support, obviously, from the Roman Catholic Church, not just in Michigan, but at the Vatican. So this is a very significant issue. And so what I believe happened is that Imam Elahi, hearing that Shahram Hadian was coming to town, and Jim Simpson went out of his way to do the following. Two local press operatives, television and press, approached the pastor, Don McKay, and interviewed him. They then completely took the pastor out of context and positioned him in the newspaper and on television as an Islamophobe. At that moment, Debbie Dengel, the congresswoman who works with the Muslim Brotherhood in Dearborn, and Imam Elahi, she went on record along with Andy Levine, another Democratic congressman, demanding that the elders in the church override the pastor and cancel the meeting because of this terrible thing that was going to happen in their jurisdiction. Again, they were concerned. Again, this is the same Debbie Dengel who attends the Bridges meetings and who sits with the Muslim Brotherhood openly. Anyway, long story short, the elders canceled the meeting. They then were approached again by Jim Simpson and others. They reinstated the meeting, and then they canceled the meeting again. The imam I mentioned approached the church, physically knocking on the church door to talk to the pastor the day before and the day after the scheduled events. It was clearly orchestrated by Imam Elahi and the Democratic leaders in the state of Michigan to basically outlaw and ban public information about Sharia and the Muslim Brotherhood and what it means. Well, frankly, Shahram is a pastor. He's a Bible preaching pastor. He was going to talk to a Bible church in in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, which is still in America and with free speech, and he was banned. We Sharia Crime Stoppers put him and Jim Simpson on that same night on our webinar, have an overwhelming national response because everybody wanted to know what was banned in Michigan. So that webinar is posted on our website. If you're curious, you can go back and look at the presentation that Shahram made and Jim Simpson made on our webinar, but was supposed to be made in public and was banned by the Michigan community, including the church, including the political leaders, and of course the Muslim community that has a lot of sway with the political
Let me
leaders.
step into this for a minute. Let me step into this for a minute
Yep.
too, because in my becoming, as you and I became acquainted, you were in that church. You had been very much ministered to and blessed by Pastor Don McKay, and this was, one of the questions that I was going to have for you. You'll still be able to answer that. Is sometimes we wonder about where are the pastors, where are churches. I'm going to guess that in the Detroit area, you had a very difficult time finding those that would come alongside you. But this was a church and this was a pastor that was allowing different ones to come in and speak on more than one occasion, and is really highly regarded. But this was basically this was a stand-up pastor, and so he came in and this is what happened to him. And I guess what the point I'm making is, when a pastor stands up, this is about at this point anyway, about as bad as it gets. The aggressive stand that the Council on American Islamic Relations took and the Muslim Brotherhood, and then, so the elders, at first they decided to comply and not have the speakers come in. Jim made a bunch of calls. It was reinstated, and then I think that it looked like it was restated. But then there was a Christian school that was renting space from the church, so then they buckled, and as a result, they feared the use of the building. And so therefore, then they put pressure again on the elders, and then it was once again withdrawn and then not to be reinstated. That was just one of the part of it. But I wanted to especially mention Don McKay, a stand-up pastor, and I hope the man is doing okay in these days, because that was a huge hit on him personally and upon his church leadership.
Right, it was a huge hit on him personally. And it divided the church. And your retelling of the story with the details is accurate. I know everything that you just said is true. So I just want to say, Don McKay is an exceptional pastor. He understood Islam, and so for a year 2 years before this event, he had been allowing us to speak in his church about this. Had been allowing Frank Gaffney actually that was through your connection with Frank Gaffney, Bill. We had Frank Gaffney speak there in the church. We had Philip Haney speak there in the church. We had 2 former Muslim women who had escaped Islam, and both of them had been witnesses to Sharia crime. 2 women who grew up and were associated different circumstances. They saw what we're talking about. They saw terrible treatment of women, and they spoke in the pulpit at this church, and it was all set up, it was all allowed, it was all supported. However, on this particular event, CARE had such power with their Democratic collaborators that they were able to pull the rug out from under. So it was very much of a setback for the community, for the people in the church, and for Don McKay. But it's very cleverly done. It was a combination of the media, the congressional leadership in the state, and the email.
And Dick, you wonder when you consider the fact that made the news, in the greater Detroit area. Here was a man that stood up, and this media, this assault, this attack, going forward since that date, and even going forward, that's going to be long remembered. The message was sent loud and clear. This is what happens if you basically even want to have somebody come in and speak on this subject of what could happen. And that's terrible.
By the way, let me share with you that I don't think people should be confused in Michigan. Michigan is really very, very far gone in terms of infiltration. So, for example, Sterling Heights, there were mosques. There were 2 mosques. The 3rd mosque was attempted to be built and the Planning Commission in Sterling Heights turned them down. The Justice Department, again, under the U.S. Attorney at the time, sided with the mosque builders against the city of Sterling Heights. So unnecessarily.
That was Jeff Sessions at the time.
Under Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, Barbara McQuaid, sided with the lawsuit brought by the mosque builders who were turned down in Sterling Heights. The reason I'm mentioning that is CARE immediately. So the city settled. The city spent $350,000 of their own taxpayer money, plus their liability insurance came up with probably a couple of $1 million to help pay for the mosque. The point I'm making is that CARE, Michigan, Dawood Walid, went into the newspaper basically gloating over their ability to wrap the Justice Department into a lawsuit and win for the mosque. They then made the statement, quoting Dawood, "We dare any municipality in the state of Michigan to turn down a mosque after this." So my point, I guess, is that Michiganders should not be confused. Compared to other states, Michigan is very, very infiltrated by the red-green axis. And that would include the Democrats, it would include the Muslim community, it would include the progressive rhino Republicans who are all okay with this. So the reason I'm mentioning that is people may or may not have heard this term. This is a term we learned from Philip Haney, but Sharam also. So Sharam is a former Muslim. Sharam explains that in Islam, there's something called the upper house and the lower house. The upper house, so Islam divides the world into the house of Islam and the house of war. If a territory is not under Islam control, an example of that would be Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey is becoming that. If you're not under Islamic control, then you are basically you are in the house of war. You are, but if a territory is being gradually moved under Sharia control, the international Muslim community, they meet and they declare, London is now what's called in the upper house, meaning there's enough Islam population and Sharia courts and no-go zones that they basically declare victory. They have won. They have taken over parts of Scandinavia. They've taken over parts of London, etc. So the upper house is a very, very scary term. You happen to live in a jurisdiction that Muslims around the world think is in the upper house. Sharam reminds us the only places that have ever escaped from being designated as being in the upper house have done that through force. So Sharam has been to Michigan and Minnesota, and Sharam's position as a former Muslim is that Minnesota is now in the upper house, and Michigan is now in the upper house. I'll just repeat that. This is really significant. This means the Muslim community has infiltrated Michigan to the point, I'm talking about cultural, not just in having mosques, but in interacting economically in the economic pulse of Michigan, in business communities, in infiltration and money in the pockets of the Democratic candidates for office and the Republicans. They got it. They basically acquired a foothold that is not going to be turned around and not going to be taken out of the upper house unless there's force. Something very, very serious to talk about. And when Sharam is coming to town to repeat that message on September 11th, the Muslim Brotherhood cannot stand for that. And so that's why they took the action to cancel Sharam and Jim Simpson. That's the indication of how serious the problem is in Michigan.
That's very helpful, Dick, and it's very, very concerning and very scary, I'm sure, to all the listeners here. Now, Dick, you've been in West Michigan, and I know, like in our area of the state, the Waco County, north of Grand Rapids, and it certainly doesn't feel like the eastern side of the state. And so, even though what you're saying is, even though the western side of the state is much different culturally and living standards and so on and so forth, that nonetheless, because of the deep engagement of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Council on Islamic in American Islamic Relations, that our legislature and our law enforcement and the FBI, for that matter, they've all been co-opted, whether it feels like it or not. That's what you're saying.
I am, and I think that has an impact on life in Traverse City and Grand Rapids, as well as on the southeast side where it's more visible. You don't have a place like Hamtramck on the west side, but you do have influence. So remember, CARE is an influence operation. Their goal is to influence things, and they influence things by putting in money into elections. Those elections are in Traverse City and Grand Rapids, as well as on the east side. So the fact that you're in a state that sends people to Lansing to do things, what gets done in Lansing affects everybody, and the overwhelming impact in Lansing is definitely pro-Islam. In fact, I think the experience we had would tell you that. Dawood Wali, the head of CARE Michigan, can walk around in the halls in Lansing and be greeted and be accepted and be worked with, while people who might criticize Islam, including a sitting senator like Colbeck, are basically shunned by his colleagues and his own party. When we talked with you in Grand Rapids, and you did a really good job, Bill, talking about the fact that people in West Michigan should be very much aware of this and horrified by it, whether they can see it as openly as they can see it in Southeast Michigan. It is a part of the state. It is a part of the culture of the state. By the way, the other thing that happens in the West Side is that there's lots and lots of refugee resettlement, whether it's from the Middle East or not. You still have a situation where the West side of the state is still being inundated with refugees from other countries. Some of those countries would include South American countries, would include African countries, etc. To the extent that we're bringing the third world into Western Michigan and basically putting them on benefits, which state taxpayers are paying for. So the whole refugee resettlement program has a big impact on the west side of the state as well. Whether those people are bringing Sharia with them or not, it's still a major transformation. Remember, Barack Obama wanted a fundamental transformation. He has absolutely accomplished that in Michigan, and the guy that's running now, Biden, that was his position as well. So I would suggest that Michigan is fundamentally transformed, and Islam is part of that. I would say, as of yesterday, if I understand the new rulings, there is now a Black Advisory Council in Michigan that is advising the executive department of your government, and there will be sensitivity training for everyone who works in the executive department in Michigan, in Lansing, and other places. There will be sensitivity training because racism in Michigan is a health issue. So you're inheriting. All I'm suggesting is, I know your governor. I know she'd like to be the vice president, and she may be trying to get attention at the last minute here. But you have a governor who is definitely part of the red-green axis. She's very, very comfortable with the Muslim Brotherhood, and people like your organization or Pastor McKay will be incrementally targeted. I think maybe the rest of the story. One more point on Sharia Crime Stoppers. The Southern Poverty Law Center has officially identified the Sharia Crime Stoppers folks as an anti-Muslim hate group. That would only be significant. There are 30 other organizations in Michigan. We are one of 31. Southern Poverty Law Center has such a favored position in Whitmer's government that Whitmer has set up Dana Nessel, the Attorney General voted by the citizens of Michigan. The Attorney General, Dana Nessel, has appointed a civil rights, a hate crimes unit, full-time staff with attorneys to go after the haters in Michigan as defined by the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Sharia Crime Stoppers is on the hit list for the Attorney General to go after. I would suggest to you that anyone who speaks about the Bible, including anyone who would be critical of LGBT, would also be on the hit list. So you have a situation in Michigan where freedom of speech is under attack, and your your governor, executive department, continues to go down that path, including now defining racism. Again, what does that mean? That means white supremacy is a health issue in Michigan, and that ties back right into the whole issue of white supremacy being a threat to the Muslim community per the FBI and the attorney.
That was very timely, because that's an executive order, I believe, this very day by our governor.
Yep.
And so the power of an executive order of that nature is very concerning. Dick, you covered incredible ground. This has been very, very deep and very well done. One of the areas, though, that remain, and you've mentioned Phil Haney, but I would like to just go back and say, that when we need to talk about the purge, the work that Phil Haney was doing, and that prior to the purge, there was still education going out to the FBI, the CIA, the military, and so on and so forth. But the purge was deep and wide, and its impact was felt almost immediately. But it's the depth of it is deeper than I would have ever imagined in such a short period of time. Speak about that, and then we'll talk about Phil Haney more specifically as a person.
Okay, so John Gondola was a trainer of FBI people on Islam. They stopped his training program. Stephen Codman was training military people in the Department of Justice on Islam. That was just terminated. John Brennan and others impacted, at the time, Robert Mueller, the head of the FBI, and all of that training was stopped. That's called the purge of federal, and then therefore local law enforcement have not been trained on anything to do with Sharia crimes since 2012. However, in the Department of Homeland Security, another version of the purge took place, and this kind of purge was actual deletion of records that connected the dots between terrorist activity in America. So if you think of Orlando, it's a massacre of 49 people in a gay nightclub. If you think of San Bernardino, the killing of a large number of people in an office environment, the Boston Massacre, if you think about those things, are they meaningful to you? Remember that there were good people, there were Christian people, there were Americans, we'll just use the word Philip Haney, doing their job in Washington every day. Philip Haney was a trained investigative person, a researcher. His job was to follow the dots and look for terrorists entering the country, leaving the country, and then doing work in networks of Sharia crime networks in America. The Muslim Brotherhood is a Sharia crime network. It's an organized international crime syndicate. That's what it is. Well, Philip Haney was a law enforcement person who went to work in Washington, D.C. to research, just like Trevor Loudon researched the communists in America. Philip was researching the Muslim Brotherhood members in America, inside and outside of the federal government, but as they moved around and as they plotted things, which actually resulted in physical violence. Remember Fort Hood, etc. Philip did his job, but to purge, Barack Obama wanted the Muslim Brotherhood in his administration. They are in the administration today. They're in the deep state. Barack filled the administration and the deep state with people from the Muslim Brotherhood. Problem was Philip Haney was putting these terrorists by name into a database, a federal database. Well, that was not going to, Obama could not stand for that. And so he had Jay Johnson, the head of Department of Homeland Security, where Philip worked, take the position that all those records would be deleted. So here you have the painstaking work of a great American, Philip Haney, connecting dots, 800 different records connecting dots about the Muslim Brotherhood operating and making plans for jihad in America. Those records were deleted. And Philip Haney was investigated 9 times, including one criminal investigation where the FBI was, he received a potential indictment because somebody said he used confidential information and made it public. That was not true. It was never proven. The point is that Philip Haney's records were deleted from the database. Those records were directly relatable and could have potentially eliminated the 49 dead people in Orlando, I'll say the 15 dead people in San Bernardino, and the people that were killed in the Boston Marathon killing, because that's what he was studying. Those records were absolutely positively deleted at the direction of the President of the United States and the head of Homeland Security. His name is Jay Johnson. If you think of Philip Haney, you may remember he attempted to get Congress to do something about it. He was rebuffed in the House and then investigated a total of 9 times by the Inspector General of DHS. And then finally, Ted Cruz brought him forward, and he sat on a panel in front of Ted Cruz where he talked about the infiltration of the Muslim Brotherhood and as well as the Southern Poverty Law Center.
And he was sitting between the Southern Poverty Law Center and the leader of the Council on American Islamic Relations, and he raised up the whole, the pictures of the icon for that represented the Council on America's Islamic, such boldness, such cool, and did it so effectively. Didn't blink.
Exactly, and that was Philip Haney, the Muslim Brotherhood. Let me say his book, of course, is See Something, Say Nothing, where he articulated, once he resigned in 2015 or 2016, he actually wrote a book which is very, very compelling, and so on. So Philip Haney is the model, American, patriotic American, Christian, Bible student, Bible teacher, the deepest level of integrity of any human being I've ever met. He would share his faith. By the way, I want to say, Pastor McKay brought me to learn about the Bible. I'm a follower of Jesus today because of Pastor McKay and Philip Haney. Bill Johnson, I'll put you in that category as well. I learned from your behavior, from Philip's behavior, from Pastor McKay's behavior, what it means to be a follower of Jesus and have this incredible courage to do what they do. So Philip Haney told a story as a whistleblower. That means Philip Haney became an enemy of the state. His own department tried to put him in prison. His own department, he was on with Hannity. He was on with other people. He was on with Glenn Beck. And he came to Michigan repeatedly. What a gift for me. I'll go back to knowing Trevor Loudon, knowing Philip Haney. Philip Haney stayed on the east side with us when he was with you and on the west side. You were hosting him as well as presenting him. A very, very unusual man in many, many ways, with so much integrity. Pastor McKay invited Philip Haney to stand in his church and present, not just about the Muslim Brotherhood and the deception in the administration, but about the deception of the interfaith dialogue. And that's why you had him over in your part of the woods. So Philip Haney, a very, very unassuming man. You would never guess the genius that's inside of his head. You would simply be like Trevor. He's a walking encyclopedia on the topic of his expertise, which happens to be Muslim Brotherhood infiltration in America. He is the arch enemy of Barack Obama and Joe Biden and the Democratic Party and the Muslim Brotherhood, because he was officially a whistleblower with great personal jeopardy to himself and his family. And he stood up for that. And
he had desired, once Trump came into office, his desire, as long as some of these other ones that you mentioned, like a John Guandolo, and Steve, I don't know if Steve Coughlin was trying to get back into, into the labor or the work. These were good men. Phil definitely wanted to get back into the Trump administration, but to no avail. Again, I think the deep state blocked Trump's understanding in some of these areas of the value and the importance of men like that. I'd heard that there were like 200 men and women that were that basically were removed from those high positions.
And I think one of the most alarming sides of that story is to hear about the military and how the military was emasculated by Barack. So the people that run the military today are really a point of concern for us. Back to Philip Haney. I think if you want to, we can fast forward. So Philip Haney tried repeatedly, and he would share this with Bill and myself, that he wanted to get back into the agencies, but he wanted to get back to help the agents who hadn't been trained in years to understand that to do their job, they have to know what to look at the border when people are trying to get in and out of the country. And he had interesting stories about people that he intercepted and so on. Anyway, so fast forward, it looked like he was finally going to get back into the administration. Remember, Bill? So here's the story that is sad to say. So Philip Haney was shot in the chest on February 20th or 21st of this year. We know that the case is still being investigated by the county sheriff in California, where he was shot in the chest. And the FBI has finished their report and turned it over to the county. We've been waiting for 5 months to see what is the determination about about Philip Haney's death. There was some conversation about being a self-inflicted wound. Anyone who knows Philip Haney as a Christian and had heard him say repeatedly, if anybody ever takes me out and somebody's going to claim it was suicide, it will never be suicide. So Philip Haney predicted his own life being taken by the enemy. And he said, if that ever happens, they'll say it's suicide. Don't believe them that it's suicide. So we're still waiting for the official ruling of the FBI. Keep in mind who the FBI is. Keep in mind about the inability to trust the FBI today. Again, I'll refer you to a Leo Holman article that has been out in the last week, talking insider who's sharing with, so another quote, not official, but another insider is giving Leo Holman whistleblower kind of information about how penetrated the FBI is. We also work with a former FBI agent who has written and been very concerned. David Boris is extremely concerned about the FBI and about local governments in terms of how they've been completely infiltrated by the red-green axis and how we have the lawlessness we have right now. So we're waiting to see what comes out about Philip Haney. But the point I wanted to make is Louis Gohmert, congressman from Texas, went to the House floor Friday after Philip was found dead and spoke and said specifically that Philip Haney had made a phone call the day before he died to a Washington agency to discuss the fact that he would not be reporting for duty. This would be in the executive department as planned, because he found out that he had to have some medical treatment. So this has occurred, according to Louis Gohmert. He had knowledge that on the Thursday, the day before Philip was found dead, Philip had placed a call to Washington, D.C. executive department about coming to work with a delay, but it looked like there had actually been a receptivity for Philip to be back in the agency. Now, Philip coming into the agency, think about it, at a high level inside this, let's say, DHS, would have been a challenge, because Philip can name names. Philip knows about the dirt, the corruption in DHS. Philip knows about the infiltration of the Muslim Brotherhood inside of the current executive department that were placed by Obama's friends, and our people are still there. So if Philip was supposed to be coming to work the week after February 21st, there would be people in that agency who would be very, very afraid for their own livelihood, their own ability to be out of prison, etc. Well, somehow Philip gets a bullet. Okay, I mean, we don't know the answer, but we certainly know the circumstances. By the way, Philip was in the process of planning a wedding. We know that for a fact. We know precisely about his fiancee. We know all about that. So what we know is that there would have been a number of people who would have been very, very impacted if Philip Haney finally got to do what he wanted to do, which was to re-enter DHS and continue to blow the whistle on the deep state that's there. But we will learn the detail from the sheriff, and we'll try to figure out what really happened. Of course, there are people who are concerned that the FBI may or may not have enough integrity to do a full study. So we'll have to play that one out. But Philip Haney, the man, is a very, very special person. I know you know that, Bill. Maybe we can spend a little time on Philip Haney, the Christian, and Philip Haney, the man.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we move towards closing, I know, just as you said, as far as an individual that was so filled with integrity and knew the scriptures so immensely.
Incredible.
And to think that, we've gotten to know a bit about the family. He came out of a really quite a rough family in California. I've gotten acquainted quite a bit, and I think you have, with his baby sister, who basically just adored him. And the family just so grieving over the incredible loss. But he was an ant scientist. And so he served in the Mideast for a number of years. And as he was over there, he learned the language, he learned Sharia, he learned the Quran. And in the brilliance of his mind, I mean, he really understood it. He understood it like nobody that I've ever, of course, I mean, at a very, very high level. And so when 911 hit, he contacted his congressman and wanted to be able to come and to serve in the federal government. He was already, I think, probably 50, right around there. He wasn't a young man, but he was so committed, and he was able to be inducted and to give his oath to the U.S. Constitution. And in the boot camp, he even physically rose to the top of the class. I mean, he was just sold out, committed to make America great again before Trump ever said anything like that. His heart was with God and with his country. So I consider him a Christian martyr, frankly. I do.
I do too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a wonderful. By the way, you could know him as a whistleblower, as a person who understood the Muslim Brotherhood. He did not, and you would watch him behave as a Christian, but when you finally got to talk to him about the Bibles, oh my gosh, this gentleman knows the Bible, and he knows the Quran, and he understands Arabic. So he was uniquely able to take all those things, as well as having the experience within an administration that was anti-American. That would be the Obama administration. So he was so special. But he spoke with what can I say? I think the word martyr, I think the word disciple, I think the things that we think about when we really think about the Bible and the people that would have associated directly with Jesus and would have told the story, I think of Philip in that space. I'll just share with you, he affected my journey to Jesus. He talked about the Paraclete all the time. He's the one who says three specific things that I'll never forget. The Interfaith Fraud is the following: Muslim, they have interfaith. They work with the Pope. They work with the Archbishop. They have meetings with mainline Protestant organizations. They have meetings with evangelicals, unfortunately, and they say, we're all together, except the Muslim community, right? Sharia, Islam, denies the divinity of Christ, right? Denies that he was crucified. And for them, this blows me away, for them, the Paraclete is Muhammad. So the Paraclete is supposed to be impacting your thinking and helping you live the life you're supposed to live. That would be Muhammad. That would be Muhammad whispering in your ear that pedophilia is okay.
As opposed to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, as opposed to the Holy Spirit, right? It just doesn't work. And I just want a couple other points. He did extensive work on the administration under Barack Obama, and unfortunately continuing under Trump, of the interfaith work that happens through the State Department. A man named Sam Brownback. Sam Brownback was, I think, governor or senator from Kansas, but he's been appointed as the ambassador for religious liberty, and he is currently operating to this day. Unfortunately, he behaves as if he's an agent of the Muslim Brotherhood. He works in the State Department, but he meets with the Pope. He meets with Islamic leaders. He is all over what's called the Abrahamic Family Center. So just so you know, we have a person at a high level in administration under Mike Pompeo who is supporting the Pope's work with Islam, where they're building a complex that includes a mosque, a church, and a synagogue. It's being built, and the Pope is all in favor of that, as is Sam Brownback. And sadly, the other person connected to Chrislam, which is the blending of Christianity and Islam, unfortunately, we'd have to say, is Mike Pence. Mike Pence has invited Sam Brownback and the Muslim Brotherhood into meetings in the White House to talk about the blending of Islam and Christianity into Chrislam, which, another way of saying that, is one world religion. So we have some cleanup work to do, hopefully in a second administration, for Donald Trump to figure out who Sam Brownback is, to educate a good guy named Mike Pompeo. We got a real problem with the blending of Islam and Christianity, when Christianity is absolutely the enemy of Islam and the enemy of Marxists. So that's the reason I'm mentioning that is that Philip Haney was the person who made that crystal clear to us, including his presentations in the Bloomfield Hills Baptist Church. Wow. Again, he named names, he didn't pull punches. He was protecting Christianity,
and he was clean. And he was clean and pure. And his love, and his I'm not saying he's a perfect man, but he loved his wife, who gave him the freedom to continue to do what he was doing, even though she was dying of cancer, which she ultimately did. Well, I know we've got to wrap up here soon, but one of the things that I also wanted to say about Philip, was when he went through those 9 hearings. One of the things that was most touching to me, because whenever he would tell it, it touched him. If you remember, they grilled him. He went through all those hearings, and he basically was stuck in a room, for those over a long period of time, and he was questioned by really the enemy of the government, though they were the government, and the enemy of the Lord. But he always said that the Lord always told him, just tell the truth, always tell the truth. And so he told the truth. He always told the truth, and they tried to find holes in his account as they questioned him over and over again, and they never did. And so this one major inquirer got to the point where it was, she basically had broke down with tears. And on that basically final meeting, they finally found no fault in him. And so he was able to leave the government with an honorable discharge, which they were trying to do everything. They were trying to tarnish his standing, and they let him go. And I think that was also because of his godliness and because God watched over him.
I think that's true. I think we talk about divine intervention. Divine intervention is why we've got the flag behind me. America is clearly, in fact, obviously, it would be the Bible people of the world that made America happen. And Philip carried that forward. Philip had so much integrity that it shone through. They did attempt. By the way, the interesting thing is the #1 leader of the vendetta against Philip Haney is a guy named Charles Edwards. Charles Edwards was the Inspector General in DHS. He has just been convicted just within the last 3 months of crimes against the government. He's left the government, but I'm just saying he was a corrupt person inside DHS investigating Philip, and now he has been indicted, convicted of crime outside of the government. So these are the kind of people in leadership positions that were trying to get Philip Haney. Charles Edwards was a crook inside DHS, and he's now been convicted of being crooked outside. So it's all about good and evil, and everything we're talking about is good and evil. And sadly, there are agents of the devil that work every day to pursue the red-green axis, getting rid of America. And Philip Haney would just do everything in his power to not let that happen, to tell the truth and make sure there's a place for Christians in America. I would say Americans, the target is to get rid of Bible people. Philip knew that. And Philip was trying to expose the government that was trying to destroy Christianity in America. So it was very, very much of a mission for him. It was a mission. He was a missionary in his own way.
Certainly was. Dick, this has been, I knew this was going to be very special to me personally, and I'm sure it is to others as well. You really do a wonderful job, and you have a very important ministry and message. I want to make sure, though, that you're able to, I want people to be aware of the work that you're doing, even now, and given the website and how they can get all that stuff, please.
All right, well, thank you. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to relive this with you. It meaningful for me, and I know that you're involved and we're brothers in this space, and I appreciate that, Bill. All right, so the Sharia Crime Stoppers right now, our primary activity right on through the election is every Monday night at 7 p.m. We have a live webinar. We have thousands of people registered for the webinar. Many watch online. Some of them watch the podcast afterwards. And so if somebody's interested in that, they can go to, the simplest way to catch up would be to go to YouTube and look at Sharia Crime Stoppers. And there you'll see a playlist of webinars we've done in the past. The new webinars are every Monday night. You can go to our website is a part of the United West. So if you go to the, T-H-E, United West, one word, .org, theunitedwest.org, you'll see on the top a banner for Sharia Crime Stoppers. If you just click on that at 7 o'clock on Monday nights, you can watch live on YouTube being pumped right into that website. So theunitedwest.org, click on Sharia Crime Stoppers. If you do that at 7 o'clock, the window will open up and you'll see us live through a YouTube projection. If you want to ask questions, you would use the technology that Bill's using today. That's called Zoom. And if you go to that same page, theunitedwest.org, Sharia Crime Stoppers page, you'll see a registration link. So if you want to click the link, then you can basically do just what you're doing right now. In other words, if you sign up and register, you'll be registered for every Monday night automatically. You'll get a message reminding you, you'll hit a link, and you'll be just like you are today watching a webinar. The difference is on Monday nights, we would see one of three people. They're called news analysts. We have Claire Lopez, former CIA operative, analyzing the news. That's amazing. We have Christine Douglas Williams, who writes for Jihad Watch, which is a Robert Spencer initiative, on another Monday. And then the third Monday rotation is Leo Hohmann. Leo Hohmann is the person that wrote the book Stealth Invasion, and so on. Now, for the last 5 or 6 meetings with Leo Hohmann, he's brought Sharam on. So we've got a pattern of Sharam Hadian, the former Muslim Christian pastor, and with Leo Hohmann. So this Monday night coming is Leo's turn. Leo will be talking about, I can kind of give you a quick thumbnail. So we have Claire Lopez talks about Turkey and Iran and Antifa, etc. Christine Douglas Williams talks about worldwide activities where the Muslim Brotherhood is functioning all over the world, including Canada. But Leo and Sharam have taken a slightly different approach. They're talking about the requirements for individual people like me to take action immediately, whether or not we think Biden's going to win or Trump's going to win. So they have gone into great detail about various action items that people should consider. An example of that is Sharam has left Washington State. Sharam is a pastor. He gave up his church. He's ministering broadly across the country through Zoom, but he moved his family of 5 children to Tennessee. Why? He thinks Washington is lost. The red-green axis has taken over the state of Washington. Look at what his governor, former governor Inslee, is doing. You will see behavior about the Marxist governor of Washington, the state of Washington, that sounds just like the state governor of Michigan. Whitmer and Inslee and Newcomb in California are all sitting in states that have been largely won over to the red-green axis. So Sharam is talking with Brannon Howes about Sanctuary States for Liberty. So Sanctuary States for Liberty is a new website talking about sanctuaries where people who believe in America can perhaps go to find each other if their territories are being overwhelmed by the red-green axis. What it's really saying, though, if people stay back in their county or their town, it's advising them on, do they really know their neighbors? Are they arming themselves legally? Do they have access to food, for example, and do they know of other people who can be their comrade in arms if that's what it takes to? If legally armed people in Idaho and other places are standing up to Antifa, so this is a question for me. What's the status of me as a citizen? Am I legally armed? Is my family legally armed? Are we prepared for sporadic violence? That's what we're seeing around the country. Are we prepared for that? Oh, by the way, the other side of this coin is, are we wearing masks now to get services? What happens if the mask is replaced by a mandatory vaccination 5 months from now under Biden or even under Trump next year? Will we be able to go into stores and buy food? Will we be able to go to doctor's offices and get medical treatment if we don't have a vaccination and a sign or certificate of some kind? So this whole notion of losing our freedoms is what Sharon and Lee are talking about. I'm going into their detail a little bit more because it's a different slant. It talks about the reality that we may be living, even under a Trump administration, with severe restrictions on our freedom and severe jeopardy to our personal safety. And that's what we've been talking about on this webinar.
No. Well, Dick, that sounds great. I know I've caught a couple of those, and I think I need to go back and hit some of them. But at any rate, it's fantastic what God has done and has continued to do in you and through you and your family. And so what a privilege it's been to have you with us, Dick. We'll have to do it again sometime. But I am really thankful for this recording that we have of Michigan, and you'll definitely want to have a link of this. If you haven't done this with others in relationship to your history in Michigan, I think it's very special. So thank you so much, Dick. You're very special to me.
Well, thank you very much for hosting this. Again, we have family in Michigan. We feel closest to the state of Michigan, and the eye-opener that we got there was very, very special. And of course, we wish for the best. I do think it's important for people to be very sober about the situation and prepare themselves for another Trump administration as good as it can be, and or a potential Biden administration as bad as it can be. It's really now about the word preparation. It's not just the 2020 election, which is critical, but it's preparation for that you're safe and your families are safe.
Amen. Well, those are good words. Dick, would you mind closing us in prayer? Or would you prefer not to?
I don't mind. I will share with you that this might be the first or second time I've actually done that, so I will attempt to do that.
Oh, praise the Lord.
I'm grateful. I am actually grateful that people like yourself and Filippini and Pastor McKay have brought me to understand Jesus and the Bible. So in prayer, let me just say, ask God the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit to make sure that people think about preparation, not just related to their personal safety, but as Sharam says, it's time to get right with God. So in your preparation for the time you have left on this earth, thank God that he has given us the gift of salvation, that all we need to do is understand that Jesus is the salvation, that it's a gift. It's not related to our works, which was a confusion that I had for most of my life. I now understand that it's a gift, it's a precious gift, and I need to be humble enough to accept it. And I guess the action for us to make sure that our loved ones have another opportunity to accept Jesus and to get right with God as we look at the scary times. As a new person to the Bible, I'm learning about a very confusing subject called Revelation, the end of the world, end times. That is a challenge for me, but I do know that Sharam and others are advising us to get right with God, and that would be my prayer for the call, is that we get right with God and that we help our most loved ones take the time to get right with God in these times. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Very good. Very special. Thank you so much. Special time. Thanks again, Dick. Hope to talk soon.
Okay, God bless you.
God bless you.